I had plenty of calcium and protein, meat and dairy. Well, I want you to change that thinking around. I want you to now think, as long as I have enough potatoes in my diet, then I have complete nutrition. Remember, there's never been a case of calcium or protein deficiency ever described. It's a non-existent problem. Hinhede couldn't find it 150 years ago. Scientists can't find one today. But we do have vitamin C, vitamin A deficiency, we got carbohydrate deficiency, etc. Let that be a takeaway message for you. Your foundation for nutrition, the pillar of nutrition in your personal diet, and so we're going to talk about the pillars of nutrition worldwide, should be potatoes.
Okay, now I would like to introduce the person responsible for these mastermind events, your speaker today, and my father, Dr. John Mcdougall. Hi, Dad. I'm glad you're here to discuss this very misunderstood tuber.
Especially since we're of Irish descent. And
right?
Of course, the people from Ireland are associated with potatoes. So how else could I have any other bias but toward potatoes? After all, the name's Mcdougall. So we're going to talk about potatoes, and hopefully when I get done with the presentation today, you'll understand how I view the potato in terms of its importance, not only for personal health, but for survival of our home on planet Earth. And that's what the presentation is going to be. Potato is our salvation. So I'm really excited to talk to you about potatoes. It happens to be, well, let's get into it. Let's see. All right. Came right up, Heather. We're getting good at this.
Perfect.
All right. So let's talk about potatoes and their position as far as supporting planet Earth and its population. I love to eat. You know, you can ask me to do a lot of things, but to ask me to be hungry is just too much. And what I want is the truth. I want to know what to eat so that I won't be a victim to my own desires, like hunger. You know, there's got to be a food for a human being that's most ideal. And of course, you know that I focus on starches like rice, corn, potatoes, beans, peas, and lentils as the primary source of calories for everybody. But if I had to pick one of the starches, I would say, give me potatoes. If you said to me, look, you only have one food to live on for the rest of your life, what would it be? Hey, give me potatoes. Yeah, I need some other things. I need clean air and clean water. I need to be moderately active, not too active. I don't want to hurt myself with exercise. I need to have adequate sunshine, but not too much. Remember, I'm Irish. I've got very light skin. And as a result, I have to be careful about the sunshine and make sure I don't get too much. I need to have comfortable surroundings, nice place to live, nice people to be with. And of course, companionship is crucial as far as making life not only durable, but enjoyable. But food, I would tell you, potatoes would be my sole choice as far as you give me one food. And that's what I'd like to have for the rest of my life. And when we get done with this presentation, you'll see how wise my choice is and how complete and nutritious potatoes are. I guess I would be known as Dr. Potato. You know, I've been associated with a potato for most of my career. Actually, Veg World did a whole article on me in relationship to potatoes. And I started writing about potatoes in the year 2002. I wrote an article called Potatoes Are the Pillars of Worldwide Nutrition. That was almost 20 years ago. I've been focusing on potatoes as my favorite food. I've, of course, picking the potato as a symbol of my existence and my professional career, I've set myself up for attacks from the low-carb camp, you know, the Dr. Atkins folks. And I'll never forget the time that I met with Dr. Atkins and many other nutritional experts in Washington, D.C., where we had the great nutrition debate in the year 2000. There were over 500 cameras there from around the world to cover this debate. And of course, I had a few jabs at Dr. Atkins. Oh, I do remember when I was preparing for this presentation, I talked to my best consultant, which is Mary, my wife, my companion. And I said, Mary, you know, when Dr. Atkins says that his diet is so easy to follow and so successful, I'm going to say to him, okay, Chubby, stand up and show the audience what you look like by taking off your coat. And she said, John, you can't do that. You know, that's one of my regrets in life, is that I didn't say that in front of 500 cameras. Because as many of you know, Dr. Atkins was overweight, if not obese, and he was quite a sick man. And the question in the Newsweek article that came out is did Dr. Mcdougall throw a pork rind at Dr. Atkins? Or maybe it'd be better yet, I could have thrown a potato at him. Probably should have. One of the more recent books that I have written in the year 2011, and one of my favorite books, is called The Starch Solution. In the process of writing that book, I can't tell you the number of friends and family and editors and book publishers, et cetera, that told me, you cannot call this book Starch. You're cutting off your nose to spite your face. And I said, but it's so important for me to understand starch is the center of the meal of human beings that I'll take that risk. And so what did I do? Not only did I put starch as the title, but look at the potato. I mean, look closely at the potato. See if you can see any symbolism in that potato. I bet you can if you look at it. It's called the Starch Solution. Now, why did I call it starch? Well, starch is the proper word. Starch has a negative connotation for most Americans and Europeans, but not all Europeans. For example, in Germany, starch means strength. And there's a European journal where people who write about starch publish. If you write about starch in terms of food or in terms of commercial ventures, what you do is you put your scientific publications in this journal called Starch, because that's the proper name. Now, why has starch become a negative word? Why as Heather said, is the potato is maligned and starch is maligned. It's vilified. Well, that wasn't by accident. That happened in the 1970s when we were developing the dietary goals for the United States. It was the McGovern report. And we had a committee, Senate committee, that evaluated the nutritional literature. And what they did is they came to the conclusion, the dietary goals for the United States, 1977, February, they came to the conclusion that the meat and dairy industry were killing Americans and that these foods were dangerous. Well, you can imagine the reaction from industry. The meat and the dairy industry, they sent out their lobbyists, they put out all their big bucks, so they weren't going to let this continue. I mean, after all, this report could have meant as much devastation to the food industry as the report by Luther Terry on tobacco and health in the United States, published in 1964, Smoking and Health by Luther Terry. The report that changed America as far as its smoking habits. We went from a population where half the population smoked to where fewer than 17% of the people in this country smoked. Ruined the tobacco business. They had to export it overseas to continue to make money. Well, they weren't going to let that happen to the food industry because they saw what happened in the Surgeon General's report on tobacco and health. And so they put out all effort. And one of their efforts was to change the nomenclature so that people couldn't really recognize the villains and they couldn't recognize the very positive foods that they should be choosing. And what they did is they took the word starch, which Grandma used to use all the time. You're coming over for dinner, what starch are you having? Well, we're having potatoes or rice or beans, et cetera. Grandma knew what starch was. At least my grandma did. Well, what they did in 1977 is they eliminated this word pretty much from the public's vocabulary. And instead, they called it complex carbohydrate. Well, what's a complex carbohydrate? Can you recognize one on your plate? Can you recognize one in your garden? No, you can recognize starches, of course. The other thing they did is in their reports, and all poor reports that have followed, is they have taken the negative things about their products, meat and dairy, and they've identified them with the terms cholesterol and saturated fat. So when anything is identified as negative in their reports, instead of saying, well, meat and dairy will kill you, they say that cholesterol and saturated fat are harmful. Anyway, they got the words. I'm going to take them back. I'm taking the word starch back. I'm going to throw it in your face. I don't care. It's the truth. It's what's right. It's called starch. Rice, corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, beans, peas, and lentils. That's starch. Many books have been written about potatoes. In fact, I have a whole collection. This is part of my collection of books on potatoes, and the history is fascinating, as we're going to talk about over the next few minutes. It wasn't always that potatoes were vilified. I mean, during World War II, when we were looking to be the best as far as a country is concerned, we were looking to have our fighting people at their best, at their physical best. Potatoes were heavily promoted during World War II with various advertisements. You know, the potato used to be an ideal food, but industry, of course, has fixed that for us, hasn't they? They've taught us that the most important thing to get is calcium, dairy, protein, meat, and don't think about carbohydrates, starches, because they're not high profit. The potato has a interesting history. It originated about 11,000 years ago in the Andes. Peru is a very famous country for eating potatoes. In fact, we went on an adventure trip to Peru. We took a group of travelers to Peru. In fact, we went on a couple of occasions. And what we saw is we saw potato farmers in our trip through Peru, and they're all trim, healthy people. And I looked into the health of the people in Peru. And what I found is that they had similar health picture to what we had in the United States 100 years ago. They had a high risk of infectious disease. They had no obesity, no heart disease, or very little cancer. In fact, the only time you saw overweight people on this trip, this adventure trip that we took about 80 people on, the only place you saw overweight people, sickly looking people, were in the restaurants. The waiters and the chefs who were exposed to the food of tourists, to the American European foods. They lost their immunity to obesity and their immunity to diseases. So it started in the Andes, and still in the Andes, they're big potato eaters. And they have many different species of potatoes in the Andes. It's the staple for 1.3 billion people. The fifth most important crop worldwide. It didn't come to Europe until the 1600s. And then it was brought to Europe, and then it was brought back to the United States and shipped all over the world, the potato. So it didn't really become a factor in European culture until the 1600s. In the United States, the potato's been around for a long time. It wasn't just the Andes, but it was also further north into North America that potatoes thrived. And some of the earliest discussions about potatoes has to do with something called the four-corner potatoes. And this represents 4 states in the United States coming together. They'd be Utah and Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. They come together. And there the potato survives. It's a small potato, but good grief, they had this potato. They found evidence of this potato being eaten and cultivated 11,000 years ago in what is now the United States of America. We are a fairly large potato growing country, and our potatoes are primarily focused in the northern latitudes because they grow most efficiently in the northern latitudes. But potatoes grow all over the world. Let's talk about the nutritional value of potatoes and how potatoes can support your health. I told you I would live on potatoes alone. That wasn't a foolish statement. I needed to make sure that this was the food that was going to keep me healthy, keep me in my best function, my best feelings. You know, it would keep me at my best for the longest possible time. That's why I chose potatoes. One of the earliest references that I have about potato eating comes from a guy named Michael Hinhede. He was a nutritionist in Denmark back in the 1900s. And he played a very prominent role during World War I. He had the Danish people, 3 million Danish people, live on the food that the animals were eating during World War I. And the results are nobody went hungry, as compared to the Germans, who kept to a well-balanced diet, kept meat and dairy in their diet, where 400,000 Germans suffered from malnutrition and starved to death. But Michiel Hinhede, he convinced the government of Denmark to change the diet of 3 million people, 3 million Danes. And as a result, they never grew hungry. They ate the food that they once fed to the animals, which were the potatoes and the soybeans and the other grains. And something else happened to these people, is they had the lowest incidence of death that they've ever experienced in Denmark. They reduced the chances of dying by 34%. Never has Denmark seen that before or after that period of time. Also, they had one of the lowest rates of Spanish flu deaths during that period of time. Well, Michiel Hinhede, he'd been doing experiments in the 1800s, trying to determine how much protein was necessary for good health and whether or not people could live on simple foods. Now, it wasn't an isolated observation. I mean, people from all over the world during all different time periods have observed people in economic distress, where they only had a single food to live on, like potatoes or primarily grains, and see how they did. So we have the experiment of millions of people being forced by circumstance to live on very, very monolithic diets like potatoes. Well, he wanted to put this into a scientific term that could be understood by other scientists of the day. And so Michiel Hinhede raised various subjects, in this case, Madsen, on single foods, in this case, potatoes. And Madsen lived on potatoes, an all potato diet, for over a year. And what they knew back then, remember, this is the turn of the century, 1800 to 1900s. What they knew back then was that the human being's requirement for protein was so low that it was impossible to meet that threshold. In other words, no diet of natural foods would fail to meet the protein needs of the human being. So when Michiel Hinhede described the diet, proposed the diet for the Danes during World War I, he wasn't worried about protein. He was worried about getting enough calories, enough other nutrients, never protein. Well, the laboratory where the term vitamin came out of, one of the most famous laboratories in the entire world, held an experiment in 1928 that was published in the Biochemical Journal. It was titled "The Value of Whole Potatoes in Human Nutrition." And you can go to Google right now, or Chrome, or any other search engine, and you can put this title in, and this article will come up. And I think you should take the trouble to read this article. It's fascinating, to say the least. Now, the author, Kahn, of this particular article, Dr. Kahn, he did this particular experiment to confirm Hinhede's work, that people could survive on these simple foods like potatoes. And so that's why he did this experiment. What he did is he took a man and a woman, age 25 and age 28, who happened to be athletes, equivalent to marathon runners of today. And he housed them in a metabolic unit where they had no choice. He could control everything that they would eat. And he fed them an all potato diet for 6 months. That's all they ate. A few spices, but basically potatoes they lived on. And some interesting things is they said they did not tire of the uniform diet, and there was no craving for change. You'll find those words right in the article when you read it, which is free and available to you thanks to the internet. And even though they were both physically active, they were described as in good health on a diet which the nitrogen, in other words, protein, was practically solely derived from potatoes. And you know what? Towards the end of the experiment, they had potatoes in various forms. They had some potatoes with oil and potatoes in salads. But towards the end of the experiment, towards the end of their 6 months, they preferred McDougall-style potatoes. In other words, oil-free potatoes. They just wanted them boiled and mashed potatoes. They got tired of the oil real quick. As, of course, most of us who've discovered the value of good eating realize greasy food does not taste good. So anyway, there's one of the most important experiments on the benefits of potatoes. We carried that research over to articles done on children. Yeah, adults can live on an all potato diet, but how about kids? Well, this experiment of 11 Peruvian children aged 8 months to 35 months of age who were suffering from starvation, malnutrition. These kids had to be renourished back to health, and they fed them an all potato diet. All of their protein came from potatoes, and they grew excellent. They had growth curves at least as good as people living in the United States, children in the US, just on potatoes alone. We had this man as a guest, Charles Voigt, at one of our advanced study weekends, and he was the potato commissioner for Washington State. And as an example of the health benefits of potatoes, he decided to go on an all potato diet. So we went on an all potato diet for 60 straight days, and he made worldwide headlines. He did, Charles Voigt, and he lost a lot of weight, and he also dropped his cholesterol and felt a little better. I followed up with him, and here he is 8 years later, still working for the Washington Potato Commission and still trim and still eating primarily potatoes, which caused him to reduce his risk of dying of heart disease by a drop of cholesterol of 67 milligrams per deciliter. One of the most well-known potato eaters these days is Andrew Taylor. He's from Australia, and he went on an all-potato diet. And the reason he went on an all-potato diet, he tells the story, and actually he discovered our work, the Mcdougall diet, and used that as an example, is that he just could not get control of his life. I mean, his family life, his business life, everything. He was suffering from terrible depression. He was overweight. He was unhealthy. He had to do something. And he would do anything to get his life back. And so he decided to go on an all potato diet. And over a 1 year period, not only did he lose 117 pounds, but he was in excellent health. He got rid of his depression. He got his life back. He now runs a website called Spud Fit, which I would encourage you to get involved in, and he will encourage you to eat primarily potatoes. Potatoes can be your soul food. It's complete nutrition. Potatoes have all the protein, all the vitamins, all the minerals, all the fat. Even though it's very low fat, only 1% of the calories are fat, that's enough fat. You know, some of your vegetable foods are deficient in vitamin A and C, but not potatoes. Like other underground storage organs, potatoes are loaded with vitamin C. In fact, they're called the anti-scurvy vegetable. Not only are potatoes good nutrition, they're superior nutrition. And a message that I'm going to give you this morning and this afternoon is this. If you can't figure out what to do to get your health back, just eat potatoes or sweet potatoes and water till you figure it out, till you take and have the time to take and plow through the 4,000 recipes that the Mcdougals have published for you in books, on our website, in our newsletters, just to eat potatoes. They're complete nutrition. They're better than nutrition of any other free living population that I can think of. And, you know, I run into this situation commonly in people. They come through our residential program, which we used to run in Santa Rosa, California. And they would leave, and the whole process was a little overwhelming for them. Well, they came with overwhelming problems too, heart disease, cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, and so on. And they had a lot to learn during this 10-day period of time. Well, in our final conversation, I would often say to them, well, you really feel overwhelmed, don't you? You know, you got to get your health back. You're facing chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, heart surgery, death. So just go home and eat sweet potatoes or potatoes. And hopefully that message would carry them through. Now, of course, we run a internet-based 12-day program that's more involved, more personal, better results, more loved by staff and by participants. And it's conducted over the internet, where our doctors go into your home, take care of you there. Telemedicine, boy, it is the medicine of the 21st century. And we're never going back to the old kind of medicine. And we also have our support staff that come into your house and help you with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Make sure your blood sugar, your blood pressure, et cetera, are just great. And with a 1-year follow-up, because we can do that now. You don't have to travel back to Santa Rosa, California. We can come right to you via the internet. So if you want to have superior nutrition, you get it through the McDougall program. And we're not going to feed you just an all-potato diet. No, unless that's what you want. We're going to feed you a diet with a great amount of variety, as much as you'd like. Simplicity, of course, is the key, I think, to getting this right, to making it easy. And so a simple diet is what most of you will come out with is a simple diet. But a few of you will come out and say, look, I need variety. Well, we have 4,000 recipes. You're going to have something different for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the next 10 years. And then we'll make you some more recipes. Potatoes taste good. As a child, I had a lot of trouble eating. And the reason is because my parents came out of the Depression. And as a result, they had to go through some pretty tough times. Stories of these times that they used to tell me talked of no food, no place to live. They lived on turnips and potatoes. That was their diet. And after going through these very difficult times, my mother in particular said, I'm not going to let my children suffer like I did. And so she didn't. She made sure that we had a plentiful diet, a diet that was based around what they thought was the best scientific advice, even though it came from industry, a diet that focused on protein and calcium as the most important nutrients. In fact, almost the only nutrients that you had to pay attention to. And so what was I fed? I was fed dairy and meat, beef, chicken, occasional fish, not much. Didn't like it. And as a result, I didn't suffer like she suffered. I suffered other problems like obesity. I used to be 90 pounds heavier than I am now. Had a massive stroke at 18. Had terrible intestinal problems, lost my tonsils. I almost died by that point of view that my mother developed during her childhood. And the lies told by industry, not by science, but by industry. Anyway, it was tough for me to eat. And my mom wanted to make sure that I had plenty of protein, plenty of calcium, particularly protein. And so meat was a big part of our meal. And one of the most difficult meals was liver. Oh, how disgusting. But even the beef was tough for me because I couldn't chew it. I'd end up masticating this glob of flesh to as small of a unit as I could, but I still couldn't get it small enough to swallow it sometimes. And I would almost choke on it. Well, I had an out. I had a way of solving this problem, and that was my dog, Bonnie, a boxer. And Bonnie used to sit by my chair side and wait hungrily for the foods that I couldn't swallow or chew up properly. And I would sneak them from the underside of my plate down to Bonnie, and she would consume the evidence. Well, my mom's message was, Johnny, you need to eat your meat. And my response was, Mom, I can't chew it. The incorrect response that she gave me was, you got to eat it to get your protein and iron. I mean, everybody knew that. And most people know that today, don't they? She should have said to me, of course you can't eat it. You have the wrong set of teeth. Give it to the dog. The dog's at least an omnivore, or maybe the cat who's a carnivore. But Johnny, you weren't designed to eat that kind of food. But she didn't know better. We are designed as a sugar eater. Now, when I say sugar, a lot of you are going to respond by white sugar or maybe maple syrup or honey or molasses. That's okay. You can do that. And we use a little bit of that on the surface of our food to enhance the flavors, but not much. It's a side dish at best, simple sugars. When I say sugar, I primarily mean sugar in the form of starch, complex sugars. We are designed to enjoy, to seek simple sugar and starches. We have various taste buds on the tip of your tongue. You probably learned these when you were in school. On the tip of the tongue, right there in front, right there in front where you can contact the food. You have two taste buds because it's so essential you get these two elements as far as nutrition is concerned. And they are sweet tasting taste buds right on the tip of the tongue, and mineral tasting taste buds, which taste salt. You have to get minerals to be healthy, to stay alive. And you've got to get sugar for your energy. There's no taste bud for protein on the tip of your tongue. Now, there are a couple of taste buds that are there to protect you from poisons. These are your bitter and sour taste buds. You know, if you eat something that's bitter or sour, it's medicinal at best and poisonous at worst. And there's a umami taste bud, which was recently popularized, and it's an MSG sensing taste bud. And then there was a fat tasting taste bud that was discovered about 15 years ago. You know, it's interesting, that taste bud, when people could taste fat, they were repulsed by fat, not attracted to it, but repulsed by it. And so they were generally thin people. So if you had a fat tasting taste bud that was active, it would discriminate so you didn't eat a high fat diet. And then at Oregon State University, about 7 years ago, they discovered a taste bud for starch, independent of sugar. Yeah, they blocked the sugar tasting taste buds, and they fed people starch like rice and corn and potatoes and beans. And what happened is they found that people were just as attracted to starch as they were to sugar. It's just as powerful. We are starch seekers. We also enjoy simple sugars. Now, that's not the way it is for a cat who's a carnivore. Cats have no sugar or starch tasting taste buds on the tip of their tongue. Cats have taste buds for amino acids, which are the components of protein. Why? Because that's their food. That's what they're supposed to eat. They're carnivorous. We're not. And we really enjoy the food. As I told you, I would live on potatoes alone. In scientific experiments done by Susan Holt, they fed various subjects different foods, asked them how they'd rate them as far as satisfaction. They developed something called a satiety index. And what they found were that starches were more satisfying than high protein foods or animal foods. Much more than meat and eggs and cheese were the satisfaction of pasta and wheat and potatoes. In fact, you can see how satisfying potatoes are. Potatoes are amongst the most satisfying of all starches. You taste, they taste good. They give you a sense of well-being. You enjoy them. Why would you not eat them? I mean, after all, the man and the woman that did Kahn's experiment in 1928, they preferred potatoes, and they preferred them low fat. They loved the taste of potatoes as you do naturally. We've just been so perverted by industry. What did they do to get us to eat their foods? You know, the meat and the dairy, the high profit foods. Well, how do we get about eating something that really doesn't taste good? Probably tastes good to a cat, but we don't have the taste buds that the cat has. So we perceive these animal foods as bland or disgusting. So how do we get them down? How do we make life bearable on boiled chicken or boiled beef? Well, you have to dock it up. You got to cover it up. You pour salt all over it, sugar all over it, salad dressings all over it, steak sauces, barbecue sauces, anything you can do to give it flavor. Anything you can do to cover up the disgusting taste that we are not designed to enjoy. That's how they caught us, is they disguised the food. Well, we've gone so far as making a recommendation to, if you want to diet, this is not if you want to follow a lifestyle. This is not if you want to be healthy for a lifetime. We don't promote this kind of thinking. And this kind of thinking, what I mean by that is we don't promote going on a specific meal plan for a short period of time to accomplish some goals and then going off. That's called a diet. Well, because of popular demand, Mary and I decided to put together Mary's Mini Diet. Mary's Mini Diet. Something that you could go on for a short period of time, get some results, and then go off. What would you go off to? You go off to the basic McDougall diet is what you would go off to, not back to the American diet, not unless you want to be fat and sick again. So the Mary Mini Diet is a diet that focuses on one starch and just a few green and yellow vegetables. And that starch, at least you know that I would choose it to be potatoes. But you could choose it to be rice, pasta, et cetera, whatever you like. Just make the diet repetitive, make it simple. Just focus on a single starch and a few vegetables. And you're on Mary's Mini Diet temporarily, not for a long period of time. A useful tool that many of you take advantage of. Oh, it's about the sugar. I've told you we like the sugar. That's the way we're designed. You like sugar. In fact, that's what you keep telling me. It's sugar that's your downfall. Well, it's only because they mix sugar with fat in the form of cakes and ice cream and pies. That's why sugar is harmful. It's because of the company it keeps. As far as eating pure sugar goes, you wouldn't do it. You can't sit down to a bowl of white sugar and tablespoon it into your mouth. You can't even do that with honey. You quickly get satiated. But if you mix it up with other ingredients like fat and chocolate, et cetera, you get it down. And we sure have taste buds for being attracted to that sugar, which allows us to eat the chocolate and the fat along with it, don't we? Well, sugar we do like. And sugar is made by plants. Only plants. Only plants make sugar. They do it through a process called photosynthesis. They gather carbon dioxide from the air, water from the ground, and through carbon dioxide from the air, water from the ground. And through the process of photosynthesis, they make glucose. That glucose is used for plant activity. For the plant to grow, for the plant to move around as it does, to collect different shades of sunshine. The plant uses that sugar for its own activities, but it stores some of the sugar too. It stores the sugar in various storage organs, which are parts of the plant. It stores the sugar for later use, for use after the plant itself dies, for use in the springtime generally when the plant renews, when it sprouts. That's when the sugars are used. When the grains germinate, the sugar is used for that activity. So it's stored in various organs in the plant. We identify these as above ground storage organs, which are legumes and grains. These are the seeds that are found in plant, the low-fat seeds. These are above ground storage organs and below ground storage organs. This converted sugar, instead of being stored as simple sugar, glucose, is stored in chains. These chains are in the form of amylose and amylopectin. It's where the sugars stick together in long chains, and then they are put in various organelles in the cells, and they're stored until the plant, to rejuvenate, needs these sugars to become anew. So there are above ground and below ground storage organs. The above ground storage organs are grains and legumes. We have also other above ground storage organs in the form of high fat seeds, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about wheat and corn and rice being the grains, and legumes being beans, peas, and lentils. And also below ground storage organs, which obviously you store the sugar below the ground. And these would be things like potatoes and sweet potatoes and bulbs and corns. They differ, the above ground and the below ground storage organs. So one of the things I want you to note that I'll tell you about again and again is that below ground storage organs, like your potatoes and sweet potatoes, are complete nutrition. they have all the vitamin A and C that you could possibly use. The above ground storage organs, however, are deficient in vitamin A and C. And so if you're going to live on grains and or legumes, you need to add a source of vitamin C and A, which could be as little as a slice of orange a day or a flower of broccoli. You don't need much to get this A and C. But do pay attention to the fact that below ground storage organs are complete. And above ground storage organs need a tiny bit of help, not much. We are starch eaters, always have been. In fact, one of the statements I love to make, and I've been making for over a decade now, is that all large, successful populations of people throughout all of verifiable human history have obtained the bulk of their calories from starch. Yeah, I mean, think about it. You know this. You know this from history. You know this from geography. You know this from your religious teachings. You know this. Is that populations of people up until recently, up until 1980, lived on starch-based diet as the majority of people that live on this planet. Historically, we talked about the American Indian and the Four Corners potatoes. We talked about the people in the Andes living on potatoes. Well, they ate potatoes during their normal life, but when they went to battle, because potatoes were so heavy, they switched to quinoa. If you look throughout North America, you also find, in addition, that we're corn eaters. You go to Africa, and you find people lived on millet and various types of grains and roots in Africa. Cassava has always been a big crop. Go to Asia, and I think the food you identify first among the Asians is rice, right? Rice, starch, rice. I know white rice, but white rice is not a deal breaker. Not as good as brown, but it's not a deal breaker. And how about the bread basket of the world? Do you remember the bread basket of the world? You know, these are your Middle Eastern countries, Egypt, for example, where people lived on wheat and barley. What happened to the bread basket of the world? The bread is vilified. You know, it used to be bread was the staff of life. But over the last 70 years, by no coincidence, its dominance of industry, starch has become a dirty word. And bread, the worst of all starches, right? Wrong. Think about it. Depend upon the education that you have had throughout your earlier years. You know this. You know, it used to be that everybody except the kings and queens lived on starch. They worked in the fields, they built the pyramids, they built the canals, the ships, everything. They did the hard work. They lived on the rice and the corn and the potatoes and so on. It was only the kings and queens who lived on rich foods. They fed the starches to the animals, and then they ate the cows and the pigs and the sheep and the various wildlife, birds, etc. You know, these are the rich people. They can afford to do that. These are the kings and the queens and the aristocrats, the priests, the priestesses. These were the sick people too. Overweight, artery disease, and so on. But that's the way it's been for, you know, thousands of years. Up until we had the Industrial Revolution and harnessing of fossil fuels. And then the common person became rich as far as the dinner table is concerned. And so over the last 30 years, the World Health Organization has told us that diseases of overnutrition, like heart disease, diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, strokes, etc. Diseases of overnutrition are more common than diseases of undernutrition. That's only been certainly since 1980. Well, you know, depend upon your previous education. You've got a lot of good education. You need to rely on it. You need to question people who tell you things that are different than what I'm trying to share with you. Unfortunately, a lot of people miss the idea when they want to become vegetarians or vegans. Or they want to do, some good in terms of animal rights or saving the planet. They get misinformed. They still hold on to the remnant that somehow starches are bad. Starches are fattening. And so they know they have to give up the animals because the animals are suffering terribly. They're destroying their planet Earth. They know that. But they still hold on to the idea that starches are bad for you. And as a result, they go for the low calorie, nutrient dense, high fiber, high water, unsatisfying green and yellow vegetables. And they starve to death. To get enough calories to support my needs for the day would take between 11 and 20 pounds of cabbage. I don't have that kind of time, much less have my intestines tolerate that much fiber in bulk. No, you can't live on a nutrient-dense green and yellow vegetable diet. You've got to get that starch in. And potatoes would be ideal. We are not, by the way, we are not carnivores. We're herbivores. We're not even omnivores. An omnivore is a dog or a bear. We're plant eaters. We're herbivores. And that fact is demonstrated in our physiology. There are certain tissues in our body that will only run on sugar. If they don't have sugar, what the body does is it makes sugar from protein through a process called gluconeogenesis. There are certain cells in the body that will only live on sugar. And these are your kidney cells, your red blood cells, and cells in your eye, in the retina. They only live on sugar. Again, if you don't eat sugar, like you're on the Atkins diet or you're starving to death, the body will take protein from your muscles or protein from your other parts of your diet, and it will convert it into sugar to provide the needs of these cells that require obligatory sugar to live. The brain's kind of that way too. The brain will live on fatty acids if you starve it to death. But it prefers to live on sugar. Maybe that's why there are some experiments done that show people who go on the Atkins diet aren't quite so bright. I wonder if that started before they chose the Atkins diet or afterwards. But we don't want to get into that. But for sure, a low-carb diet contributes to poor thinking, poor mental function, because your brain runs on sugar. Let me emphasize this again. Potatoes and other starches. Potatoes, underground storage organs, are nutritionally complete. Above ground storage organs, we'll add a little bit of green and yellow vegetable or fruit to add the vitamin A and C. But these are nutritionally complete foods. We could get into the discussion of vitamin B12, and we will sometime. Just leave it to be for now. That'll take at least 3 years to run out of your B12 stores and probably 20 to 30 years. So you got time to figure out where to get your B12 from. But otherwise, have confidence. In my mother's thinking, if we sat down to a meal of calcium and protein, which we were taught were essential nutrients, when the truth is there's never been a case of protein or calcium deficiency ever described in the world literature. In my mother's thinking, when we sat down to meat, that was good because we were made of meat. And we sat down to dairy. That was good because you could grow a whole baby on milk. What could be more perfect than meat and dairy? And I was supposed to have confidence in my overall diet because I had plenty of calcium and protein, meat and dairy. Well, I want you to change that thinking around. I want you to now think, as long as I have enough potatoes in my diet, then I have complete nutrition. Remember, there's never been a case of calcium or protein deficiency ever described. It's a non-existent problem. Hinhede couldn't find it 150 years ago. Scientists can't find one today. But we do have vitamin C, vitamin A deficiency, we got carbohydrate deficiency, etc. Let that be a takeaway message for you. Your foundation for nutrition, the pillar of nutrition in your personal diet, and so we're going to talk about the pillars of nutrition worldwide, should be potatoes or other starches. You want to perform? Well, carbohydrate is the way to perform. We've known that for experiments that have been done over 100 years. You know, they'll put people on stationary bicycles and they'll see how long they could pedal. They're based on various diets. The carbohydrate, the starch eaters are the ones that last. I talked to you about the gladiators of old, also known as the barley men. These fighting men, these athletes, these stars of the Roman Empire, they were fed barley and a few beans. They were known as the barley men. Why? Because their owners wanted them to win. And modern athletes today, marathon runners, triathlon runners, the winners, like those from Ethiopia and Kenya, live on corn, starch-based diets. So you want to be at the front of the pack, you eat starch. You want to be at the back of the pack, you eat protein, Atkins diet, low-carb diet, etc. Winning athletes know this for sure. I had a chance to take care of a very famous athlete. His name was Carl Lewis. Carl Lewis, I met him in Minneapolis. We were going on a television show together called Twin Cities Live, and we met in the green room. He was there with his entourage of supporting staff, and we sat and talked for a minute. I quickly recognized him as Carl Lewis, one of the world's greatest athletes, and we started talking. And Carl told me, he says, you know, I can't. I weigh a few extra ounces, which is keeping me from the records I want to set. And every time I go on a diet, I can't perform. It's just a terrible dilemma. I don't know what to do. And I said, as I handed him a copy of one of my books, probably the McDougall program, 12 Days to Dynamic Health, I said, Carl, do this. It'll work out just wonderful for you. Well, Carl Lewis, from that day on, started the McDougall diet. And he set the world record for the 100-meter dash on the McDougall diet. He set the record for the 3 longest long jumps on the McDougall diet. He won three relay races, gold medals on the McDougall diet. And he felt so good about the McDougall diet that he sent his sister to my live-in program at St. Helena Hospital. Anyway, there's a radio interview with Carl Lewis on my website if you want to hear a bit of a discussion. Wow, what an honor for me to have a chance to help the fastest man in the world set the world record at that time based on a high potato, high carbohydrate, high starch diet. He was so excited, he went back and told the Santa Monica track team all about what he discovered with McDougall, and half the Santa Monica track team went on our program. Again, still today, winning athletes, carbohydrate load, and real winning athletes, carbohydrate load every day of the year. But you don't have to be an athlete in terms of winning a marathon or triathlon. You could be an athlete in terms of making your way around the office, or chasing your 2-year-old around, or just going out for your morning walk. You want to be at your best. What could be better than the diet that the fastest man in the world chooses? Potatoes are also anti-disease. Well, I started out by telling you that I sometimes get into a desperate situation with people who go through our program. It only happens occasionally. Few people, they didn't come with much preparation. And they don't know quite what to fix when they go home. And I tell them, just live on potatoes and sweet potatoes and so on. Well, you could live on just potatoes, or you could pick among the various other starches and you do just as well. Potatoes may have some particular efficiency to them, but really any starch is going to make a miraculous improvement in terms of you folks who still eat the Western diet. These potatoes, they support health in many ways. They're high carbohydrate, which helps in the healing process. They have a multitude of vitamins and minerals. In fact, this is the most nutrient-dense diet there is. I have people who come to me who say, look, I've had intestinal bypass surgery for obesity. I now have malabsorption of my body because my intestines have been rearranged. My bariatric doctor tells me I have to take these vitamin supplements and that I really need to focus on protein and calcium. How can I go on the McDougall diet when I've already been through this kind of malabsorption surgery, bariatric surgery? Well, realize that the McDougall diet is the most nutrient-dense diet that there is. You've got to understand that calcium and protein aren't necessary nutrients. You throw those babies out, guess what? You're left with real nutrients that you require, and they're in starches, vegetables, and fruits. Anyway, I've spent many years, we're going to talk about this in a minute, many years taking care of people who have all kinds of diseases related to the Western diet, and they are cured. Why? Not only have they included the components that allow for the body to heal, allow it to do its natural healing, but they've removed the poisons which cause damage to the body. So because of this twofold approach, which happens to be the same food, you get well, you get your health back. Potatoes have been used for some interesting things like to neutralize stomach acid. Potato peels have been put on wounds to help them heal faster. And the potato has been many places in terms of its nutritional and healing abilities. And by the way, potatoes have even been shown to lower blood sugar better than rice, or at least as good as rice. I mean, good grief, here's a big study on people with type 2 diabetes, and they feed them rice or potatoes. Rice is an excellent food for curing diabetes, type 2 diabetes. By the way, type 2 diabetes is 100% curable. But potatoes do just as well. In fact, maybe even better. Oh boy, I'll tell you, this is probably this is the second biggest bit of misinformation that keeps people from having good health. The first bit of misinformation is that protein is the most important nutrient. And you got to eat your meat and your other animal foods to get your protein. But number two is starches are fattening. And what chance do you have? Why would I eat potatoes when they're fattening and they don't have enough protein? Well, we've been through the protein part, I think, enough to convince you that there's no such thing as protein deficiency. Well, how about the starches will make you fat? Well, there's a demonstrations that I packed in my suitcase, put on airplanes, and travel all over the world to show. And that's my famous stomach demonstration, when I try to explain to people what really makes you fat. And there are three qualities of food that make people fat. One is their calorie density, two is the amount of fat they have, and three is the amount of carbohydrate they have. If you look at the numbers across the top, you see the calorie density of various foods. Butter is 9 calories per gram, just like oil is 9 calories per gram. Your salad dressings are 9 calories per gram. Margarine's 9 calories per gram. Corn oil, 9 calories per gram. The most concentrated calories in any food. And you can see that they just fill a little bit of the stomach. Not much. In fact, that's 500 calories of butter that you see there in that stomach. Well, if you move on to the anus, which all contain 500 calories each, you'll see the comparison. Cheese is 4 calories per gram, just like pure white sugar is 4 calories per gram. But people get confused. Yeah, pure white sugar is 4 calories per gram, but you add some fiber and some water, other components, and you make starch. Starches are 1 calorie per gram. Meat is about 4 calories per gram. Remember, pure white sugar is 4 calories per gram, but not starch. Your starches are about 1 calorie per gram. Potatoes, even fewer calories. So you have the first principle for weight loss, which has to do with the volume of the food versus calories. The rich Western diet is very calorie dense. So by the time you fill up your stomach, you've taken in an excessive amount of calories. You end up on the wrong side of the equation. Whereas your starches, vegetables, and fruits, they are calorie dilute. So they fill up the stomach with the right amount of calories, not too few, the right amount. If you tried to live on just vegetables, as we talked about, you'd be getting in too few calories. Isn't it neat that starch is made so ideal, but it's so maligned? The other thing about these particular foods, and I'll go through them with you in the same order. Butter is 100% fat. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. So much so that I could take a needle, I could stick it in your buttocks, thigh, or abdomen, I could suck the fat out, I can take it to the lab and analyze it, and I can tell what foods you like to eat. The fat you eat is the fat you wear, from my lips to my hips. If you happen to like cold water marine fish, you'll be full of omega-3 fats when I biopsy you. You like margarines and shortenings like Crisco, you're going to be full of trans fats when I biopsy you. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. If you go on to dairy foods and meat foods, there's 60, 70, 80% of the calories are fat. Rice and potatoes and corn, they're very low fat. So there's virtually no fat to wear. There's enough fat to carry on your body needs. You have all the essential fats. Essential fats only come from plants. Part of the great conspiracy that only plants provide your essential nutrients. But they're very low in fat. Enough, but very low in fat. There's no fat to wear. Let's go on to the third part of this. And this may be particularly important to some of you, those of you who think that you have a psychological problem relating to your overweight and your eating. I'm here to tell you, you may have lots of psychological problems, but being overweight is not one of them. The problem is you're ignoring what the body perceives as satisfying. The body is satisfied by sugar, carbohydrate. There have been various experiments done where they've taken subjects, they've housed them in a metabolic ward, they've fed them various meals that contain different levels of fat and different levels of carbohydrate. And what they find is that it's carbohydrate that satisfies the hunger drive. The body hardly even notices fat. So when you're looking for appetite satisfaction, you look for high carbohydrate foods. There's no carbohydrate in oil, butter, margarine. Meat and dairy have virtually no carbohydrate in them. Cheese, 2% of the calories are carbohydrate. Whereas rice, corn, and potatoes, they're 70, 80% carbohydrate. That satisfies your hunger drive, as we talked about in previous slides. So it's kind of neat, all of these three things go together, isn't it? You know, the same foods that are calorie dilute are low in fat, so you don't have any fat to wear, and have lots of carbohydrate to satisfy your hunger drive. You know, this could really turn out to be a practical thing for you if you're one of those folks who thinks they have an eating disorder. You're sure of it because here you sat and ate a whole big pile of food and you're still hungry. You walk by that candy machine, you can't resist. There must be something wrong with me. I must have an eating disorder. I just ate. Well, you ate no carbohydrate, low carbohydrate foods. You don't have an eating disorder. You're not an obsessive compulsive overeater. You're just not giving your body what it needs in terms of satisfying ingredients. which is the sugar, the carbohydrate, the starch. You know, I can recall the way I used to eat. Boy, I've always been an enthusiastic eater. I can recall the way I'd respond to my plates of carbohydrate deficient foods, my plates of oil and meat and dairy. I would chew and swallow, and boy, I was still hungry. And I'd get up, get another plate of carbohydrate deficient food. I would chew and swallow, and I noticed that something was going on because my abdomen felt a little bit distended. And then I got my third plate of carbohydrate deficient food, swallowed. I was still hungry, but I finally got my signals that it was time to stop eating. I was overstuffed and in pain. But if I'd had room for one more pork chop, I'd have shoved it in, because I had consumed the wrong kind of food, the animal foods, the oils, as opposed to starch. Starch makes you thin. Think about it worldwide, historically. Starch eaters are trim. All right. So if you look down on the bottom row of this particular slide, and I put a lot of details in all the slides in this presentation. Why? Because I hope you go back and watch this presentation again and pause on occasion and look at the slides that I put up there. They give you a whole bunch of extra information that I may not have been able to discuss with you during this particular lecture. Like, for example, we talk about the fat content of oils and butters and margarines. So they're 100% fat. It's listed right there on the bottom row of figures. And you look at the carbohydrate content of various foods. That will remind you of what we just talked about. Starches make you trim. They cause you to respond appropriately to your appetite. Yeah. And by the way, you're never going to get over this. So you might as well give in. You're always going to be satisfied by carbohydrate. You're never going to be satisfied by protein and fat. Carbohydrate is the secret ingredient. So give up. Get rid of the idea that potatoes are bad for you, starches are fattening, etc. The results of the McDougall diet. We've had 3 major studies done that have never been contested, by the way, and I encourage you to have your naysaying friends and relatives and professionals in your life. I encourage you to present to them these particular studies, which are free. Ask what's wrong. You know, why should I not believe Dr. McDougall? When he looked at 10 years of patients who went through his residential program in Santa Rosa, California. And by the way, we did similar research on our patients at St. Lucie Hospital over a similar period of time, and got, of course, the same results. And we published that too in the scientific research. But the 3 major studies that have recently been published, one is of 1,703 people that went through our program. We analyzed what happened to them. We collected the data. And we didn't exclude anybody, regardless of what excuses you might have had for not being in the study. We included everybody. And the results were quite dramatic. And they were measured over a 7-day period of time. In 7 days, we found eating as much food that people loved. Remember what the man and the woman in 1928 really loved: starch. You know, after an initial adjustment, 2 or 3 or 4 days in our telemedicine program that we're doing now, or previously in our residential program, you really love the food. It takes you maybe 3 or 4 days to make the adjustment. So here they are eating as much food in cafeteria style provided by our expert chefs at our resort for a 10-year period of time. And yet, unconsciously, without any pain at all, the average weight loss was 3.1 pounds. Average drop in cholesterol, 22 points in 7 days. That's better than you can do with a statin. Blood pressures dropped, 18 over 11 millimeters of mercury in people who had high blood pressure. And this is really an important thing. Sick people take drugs, ladies and gentlemen. Healthy people don't. You only want to use medications that do more good than harm. And most of you are on medications that do more harm than good. I know this, you don't. You want to get off all unnecessary medications. So we do that at our programs. In fact, as far as I know, this is the only medically supervised legal doctor-patient care relationship where we have a goal of taking you off all unnecessary medications. And we were able, based upon this research, to have 90% of people who are on diabetic and high blood pressure medications to reduce or stop their medication. Sick people take drugs. To discontinue them under a medically supervised situation is ideal. And by the way, we're real doctors. We're board certified doctors. We have prescription pads. We're gonna prescribe medication for you when necessary, but not based upon the need for the drug companies to sell for extra profits this year. No. We're only beholden to the patients. Anyway, we're able to get people off medications. This is a 10-year period of time that we looked at our people who went through the residential program in Santa Rosa, California. I had an independent study done from the medical school in Portland, Oregon. It's called Oregon Health and Science University. It's where their medical school is. It happens to be where my son is a professor of medicine these days. And I approached them about 10 years ago. And I asked them to do a study on diet and multiple sclerosis because they had one of my mentors, one of the heroes in this whole dietary revolution, Roy Swank, as the head of neurology there for 23 years. And he successfully treated MS patients with a low-fat diet. Over 5,000 people he cared for. The head of neurology at Oregon Health and Science University for 23 years. So I wanted to repeat in a different way the experimentation that he had done through his career, his clinical years, observations that he'd reported in a whole bunch of scientific studies on the treatment of multiple sclerosis. And basically it comes down to, if you follow a low-fat diet, you stop this disease. Well, anyway, Oregon Health and Science University came in and designed the study, picked the participants, randomized them to a control and intervention group, the best scientific research that you could possibly do. They then analyzed the results, collected the data, they determined the tests that would be done, and they published the scientific studies. The only thing that the McDougall people did was to educate these folks. That's all. We just had them come down to our 10-day program. That's it. Otherwise, we had no involvement in this particular study. How independent, how honest can you possibly get? Well, the results, this is 1 year results of the McDougall program. The 1 year, at the end of a year, the average weight loss was nearly 20 pounds. The average drop in cholesterol was nearly 20 points. They reported a dramatic reduction in fatigue. And people with MS, they suffer terribly from fatigue. It's incapacitating often. Tremendous reduction in fatigue. And also the blood insulin levels decreased, which is associated with heart disease and diabetes, et cetera. The interesting thing that came out of this particular study was how well people liked the diet and were willing to stay with it. And we got results that are even unheard of in the pharmaceutical business. You can't get people to take drugs with the frequency that we got people to comply with our program. Why? Because they love the results. They could see the results immediately, just like any of you can. They also had hopes that their MS would be less troublesome, and I believe clearly it will be, as Dr. Swank did. But they love the food. Yeah. And so surprising to Oregon Health and Science University, surprising to my investigators in the neurology department there, that the people complied. They found that the intervention group, the ones that we educated, dropped their fat intake from 40% down to 15% and maintained that drop in fat for a whole year. The compliance, or the adherence, maybe that's the better term, 85% of the people adhered strictly to the diet for a year. Something's got to be right, don't you think? Independently, in New Zealand, how more independent could you be? I didn't even know this study was going on, but they used the McDougall diet, as when you read the paper, you'll see. They took a community and did a 12-month research project in this community. Taught them through outpatient community classes, analyzed them, evaluated them, took medical care of them through doctors, medical doctors. And they got basically the same results that we got in the previous 2 studies. They claimed, again, even before I knew that they used our particular diet, they claimed that they got the best weight loss of any program, because they found that they got a 25-pound weight loss using the McDougall diet over a year. Cholesterol drops were similar, and adherence was similar. People continued to go to the meetings. They felt better. As I mentioned, our work has never been contested. This is the truth. It's basic, it's simple, it's nonprofit, so it doesn't get a lot of attention. But I know you're interested. So what we're talking about is a starch-based diet. I hope I've convinced you you sacrifice nothing. You do not sacrifice your health, good nutrition, enjoyment, finances, nothing. What you end up doing is you end up incorporating good health and good food in your life. And you also feel responsible about what you're doing. What you give up is disgusting, unsatisfying meals and bad health and a constant battle of the bulge. Well, those are the basics on nutrition. I hope that you gathered enough information so that you're convinced, at least I'm convinced, that the potato is good food. And that if you think of nothing else, if nothing else has changed in your life and your way of looking at the world, it's your understanding of the potato, the humble potato.
Thank you, Dad.
The truth is simple and easy to understand, Heather. Do we have any questions?
Many.
Okay.
Many.
Well, first of all, I want to know, do people like my potato tie?
I love it.
Yeah.
Type in the chat if you like Dr. McDougall's potato tie. I love that.
Well,
Perfect for today.
Chef AJ gave that to me.
I love it. And she's online right now, so
you
can give her a thank you. Okay, so some great questions have come in. Some we'll answer in our second session just because they're more pertinent to that topic. But I have a question that's come up a few times. Is there one potato that's more nutritious than another? I mean, there's so many types of potatoes. There's also sweet potatoes, yams.
Well, we're going to address this a little bit in the next lecture, but the answer is no. There are 4,300 varieties of sweet potatoes in Peru or in the world, and 180 different species of potatoes. Some are tough to eat. They're not palatable. But those potatoes that are palatable, I don't think nature made a mistake. And I don't see one particular potato more nutritious than another. It's just like I tried to emphasize potatoes for you during this lecture, just to make things simple and to give you an ideal. But hey, rice is good. Corn is good. It supplied the nutrition for hundreds of years for people in the Americas. Corn did. And wheat and barley supplied good nutrition for thousands of years in Europe. And rice supplied good nutrition for 5,000 years in Asia, at least. So don't get hung up on the fact that one potato is particularly better than another. I don't know what that would be. Or that one starch is particularly better than another. I guess I would prefer potatoes, and I told you why. I'm Irish. I like potatoes. I love to eat. So potatoes have come to be my favorite food. I'm Dr. Potato.
Okay, thank you. A number of questions have come up about organic versus non-organic.
Yeah,
Is that
I
important?
know. Have you noticed, Heather, that there are organic potatoes in the store?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you
Oh,
do?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't paid attention. Probably should have. And of course, we always try and buy organic in our home. And the reason we do is these pesticides are definitely involved in brain damage. Pesticides cause serious neurologic problems like Parkinson's disease. Organophosphates cause Parkinson's, regardless of what you might have heard otherwise. They attack the substantia nigra in the brain. It's an area of the brain which results in typical Parkinson's symptoms. Organophosphates, which are pesticides. Sheep herders who deal with organophosphates with the sheep, dipping the sheep, etc. They've scored lower on their intellectual tests than the general population because of the damage from organophosphates. These organophosphates and other environmental chemicals, they initiate and promote cancer. There are a whole bunch of environmental pollutants out there that have an estrogen sex hormone type of effect. So these particular pesticides, environmental pollutants, and so on, they cause early onset of maturity. They may be involved in hormone-dependent cancers like breast and uterine cancer, testicular cancer. So you want to avoid these. Now, how do you avoid them? Well, one way is to buy organic, and that's good. But I've emphasized for you, particularly in the protein lectures, and I want to redo it now, is that the best way to reduce your intake of environmental pollutants is to eat low on the food chain. Low on the food chain. Understand this, if you can, by my basic hand gestures. As you start low, you put the pesticide, the herbicide, on your plant life, on your algae and your seaweed and your weeds, et cetera, on your crops. And what happens is, because these are fat soluble, they're attracted to fat, is that as they move up the food chain, the cow eats the grass. The cow will take the pesticides that are in the grass and concentrate it, a process called biomagnification or bioaccumulation. Bioaccumulation is the process, biomagnification is the result. What they end up doing is they concentrate these pesticides in the cow. And then we come along, we eat the cow, and let's just say we eat 200 pounds of cow a year. We concentrate the pesticide that was in that 200 pounds of cow into, say, 1 pound of body fat. We bioaccumulate again. And the end of the food chain is babies sucking off mother's breast. The infants that should be raised on breast milk, and of course that's almost the sole food that I recommend, certainly has priority over anything else, is human breast milk, is a health hazard. In America, it's a health hazard. Study done in the 1970s, and it has to be worse now, by the Environmental Defense Fund. What they did is they looked at 1,400 women. They examined their breast milk. They found levels of pesticides so high that they declared it a health hazard. And what happens is, mom with good intentions, and believe me, let me say it again, you need to breastfeed, regardless of what I'm talking to you about now. The advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. A mother will drop half her pesticide load into her infant within 6 months of nursing. So it's a big deal. You need to eat as clean as possible, and that begins by eating low on the food chain. And secondarily, you want to avoid the pesticides and herbicides, and organic may be a good term to lead you in that direction.
What about just peeling the potato? If you aren't buying organic, will peeling it make a difference, or does it?
Yeah, it'll help. I haven't really looked it up, whether anybody's analyzed the pesticide. I'm sure this has been done, but my guess is that since these are applied to the surface of the potato, that peeling will make a big difference.
Well, apparently the potatoes have just made the dirty dozen as far as, the
pesticide.
Top 12. Yeah.
Well, then the answer should be, we need to stop putting the pesticides on the potatoes and find more natural ways, more environmentally friendly ways to grow our foods. That should be the response people have. And I'm not in any way trying to justify eating these chemicals. But I think part of this message that's out there comes from industry, which makes you believe that there's nothing safe to eat. We condemn the meat and the dairy and the processed foods, the high oil foods as being serious health hazards. And in a way to dilute that out so that you won't be too afraid as a buyer, as a consumer, is to point out hazards in other products. Like, for example, they talk about various kinds of infections in plant foods, listeria in the cantaloupes in Europe about 8 years ago. And the pesticides that were on the Odwalla apples. Let's see, what did they have on there? Anyway, they had, I'm sorry, the Odwalla apples had the E. coli infection that killed the kids. That was about 20 years ago. What they do, they talk about how they have the infection problems, and in this case, we're talking about a pesticide problem, and that leaves the consumer with the attitude that there's nothing safe to eat. Well, if the consumer was armed with the information that these infections like Listeria, Salmonella, E. coli, et cetera, only come from animals, and the reason they're on your vegetable foods is because some cow walked through the field and pooped on your cantaloupe, or some human farm worker pooped on your tomatoes. It's spread by humans. These diseases are not spread from the plant kingdom to the animal kingdom. They're only spread within the animal kingdom. So, by putting out these stories that get a lot of attention in the newspaper, the consumer is led to believe nothing's safe to eat. And the answer is we should make our foods clean. And it's the same thing with the pesticide problem, Heather, is that it's a way of letting the consumer know that there's nothing safe to eat. You might as well choose the junk. Not true. And the answer should be, as I mentioned in the beginning, is we should be able to grow our foods in a more friendly way, healthy way.
Thank you for that. I've got a few questions about the blood type diet and how if you're type O, white potatoes are a no-no. Can you shed some light on that?
I think Diamano, I may have his name wrong. He's a chiropractor that wrote many years ago and still has some popularity. It's about the blood type diet, and I'll see if I can convey to you what this diet is about based on my memory. The idea is that if you have type A blood, which is common in Asians, you're okay to eat starches like rice. But if you have type O blood, which is common in Europeans, Caucasians, whites, you should eat meat because that's what typically Europeans would be eating. And that's based, and Europeans have more of type O blood. Okay. The fact is that Europeans do have type O blood. Europeans do eat a lot of meat, but that's just coincidental. That's just a confounding issue. And the fact is that Asians eat a lot of rice and they have type A blood, but that's just an association which has nothing to do with cause and effect. In fact, I thought this was such a silly concept. And I was, of course, interested in getting more popularity to my beliefs, that what I decided to do during one of my book publicity tours is I was going to come out with another book, to complement the blood type diet. I was going to call the new book the shoe size diet. The shoe size. So if you happen to have small feet, like Asians do, and they have a type A blood, then you should eat rice. And if you have big feet, like Caucasians do, who eat lots of meat, then you should eat meat. It's called the shoe size diet. What do you think? Do you think I'd have made a little extra money, Heather?
I don't know. I like that.
The public will believe anything, particularly if it takes the onus of responsibility for their current situation of personal appearance and health. It takes it away from them as a personal responsibility. People want to hear it's some unknown fact that was hidden to me which has caused me to be overweight and sick all these years. And finally, through the blood type diet, I know this bit of missing information that I can now at least not blame myself for being in such horrible shape. It was due to the fact that, it was a blood type. I had the wrong blood type, etc. Anyway, it's a silly program based upon some observations that happen to be associations that have nothing to do with cause and effect.
Okay, thank you. Can we talk a bit about potato storage? Lots of people are storing their potatoes and they end up getting little roots or gray areas or green on the skin. What's the best way to store potatoes? And do we need to worry about these things, the roots and the green or the gray?
Discuss that in a little bit of detail, but what we're talking about is potatoes spoiling. You don't want to eat spoiled food of any kind. And when potatoes spoil, they produce a green colored substance called solanine. And this solanine can make you quite sick, nauseated. It won't kill you, but it can make you quite sick. And this is produced with spoiling of potatoes. And the way you tell your potatoes are spoiled is when you peel them, or even without peeling them, you notice a green discoloration in the potato flesh. You also can get an idea that your potatoes are overdone by the fact that they have buds on them. And those kinds of potatoes you should avoid. The best way to store potatoes is in a cool, dry place. And now you can go one step further. You can dehydrate the potatoes and make freeze-dried potatoes. As a matter of fact, when Mom and I, Mary and I, put together a survival kit for people with COVID-19 as part of the recommendation for things that we thought you should store in case food was not available, was freeze-dried potatoes, which you could buy in lots of pounds. And when you freeze-dry your potatoes, which happens to be an old tradition, goes back thousands of years in the Andes. They still make freeze-dried potatoes, and they sell them in the Andes as chuño, C-H-U-N, one of those funny things over the top. Chuño is freeze-dried potatoes, and they were able to do that in the Andes because it's high mountains. And during the daytime, you would be able to dry the potatoes due to the hot sunlight. And at nighttime, you'd be able to freeze the potatoes because it became that cold in the mountaintops of the Andes. So they produce freeze-dried potatoes, which even thousands of years ago, they used to store in cool, dry places, and they would last 10 years. And whether or not that particular village survived depended upon their storage of freeze-dried potatoes. Anyway, cool, dry place, fresh are going to spoil in a matter of time. Let's just guess weeks, months. And freeze-dried are going to last you. We've got freeze-dried potatoes that are in the back room. And of course, me being a potato lover, I won't suffer at all if we have a situation where food's not easily available.
So I'm embarrassed to admit that I've had potatoes like that, and I've peeled off all the green stuff, and I've taken the little buds out, and I've used them. Is that okay?
I think so. If you clean them up, the solanine is clearly seen by green. But again, potatoes are cheap. Might as well throw them away. Mary suggested a couple things. She said, don't store onions and potatoes together next to each other. Don't know why, but if she told you not to do it, don't do it. Pardon?
Onions and the potatoes both sprout that way.
They won't sprout that way?
They do sprout that way.
Oh, they do sprout. There's more sprouting going on, she says. Mm-hmm. And also, you're not supposed to store potatoes in a refrigerator, probably because refrigerators are moist. But she does store her small potatoes in the produce drawer of the refrigerator. But we eat a lot of potatoes, to say the least. And mashed potatoes are my favorite, especially with Mary's golden gravy. People would fight over that golden gravy at the live-in program.
We were talking about that in the chat. Some of the people that are watching today love mashed potatoes with golden gravy. So if you haven't tried it, go to our website, type golden gravy in the search engine, and it's amazing. You can make a bunch of it, keep it in the refrigerator, and have mashed potatoes whenever you're hungry.
We do. I mean, this is how we live, folks. We'll have mashed potatoes and corn and peas and a gravy over the top, and that's a whole meal. And you may not think of that as very satisfying now, particularly if you are a meat eater, because you're used to that lump of flesh and that glob of grease in your stomach, and you think this is satisfaction. Well, you're just used to it. The way I have people relate to that is there's something called the Chinese restaurant syndrome, where typical American eaters, the high meat, high dairy eater, will go to a Chinese restaurant and they'll say, well, I'm hungry a half an hour later. It's because they don't have that lump of flesh and that glob of fat in their stomach that they're used to. But what happens in time, it doesn't take long, very short period of time. What happens is you get a new value for satisfaction. You don't look for that lump of flesh and that glob of grease. In fact, that's quite nauseating, quite uncomfortable, quite unsatisfying, is you have different responses, the natural responses that occur through a diet low in fat, high in starch. And whereas the Chinese restaurant syndrome, unsatisfying meal, is that way now for you, quickly as you change to a starch-based diet, you'll develop new senses of satisfaction.
Thank you. I have another question. It's a bit long, but I think it's a good one. Aren't we designed to eat both starch and fruit, hence the sugar-seeking taste buds? What do you think about the theory that humans are frugivores like other primates? You recommend limiting fruit for weight loss. Can you explain what mechanism fruit hinders weight loss? If carbohydrate, sugar don't cause weight gain, then how can eating fruit cause weight gain?
Eating fruit does not cause weight gain. The fruit is made of simple sugars. So the rise in blood sugar and insulin is very quick, and the fall is very quick too. It's not sustained like you'd get with starch. With starch, like rice, corn, and potatoes, because the starches have to be digested in the intestinal tract and are slowly absorbed into the bloodstream, affecting the brain over a long period of time, you get long-term satisfaction. So in that way, fruits may be less easy to lose weight with. I wouldn't consider them weight gaining. I would consider a high fruit diet to discourage rapid weight loss. And the reason is that you do have rises in blood sugar and insulin levels, and insulin pushes fat into fat cells. The reason is that we can eat so much fruit. Now, people will sit down and eat 20 fruits at a time. And then they'll do even worse. They'll eat dried fruit. And that's really concentrated calories. And all that simple sugar makes a difference. Even though the sugar doesn't turn into fat, it spares fat. In other words, the body would rather burn sugar and leaves the fat in your butt, in your thigh, in your abdomen. It spares fat. So in that way, it would encourage weight gain too. So you've got the rapid rise and fall in hunger drive, and you've got the sparing effect of carbohydrate. So in those two ways, and the fact that people love fruit so much and are so familiar with it, if I didn't limit fruit to 2 or 3 a day in general, then what would happen is we'd have people start our program and they would eat 20, 30 fruits at a time. And they're missing the importance of starch when they do that. And that's why I put that qualification in there that you should keep your fruits at 2 or 3 a day. But I want to tell you, Heather, do you remember that nectarine tree? In fact, do you still have that nectarine tree? Oh, I'm coming down a nectarine tree. That nectarine tree, and Heather and her family took over our property. And there's this nectarine tree next to our house. And boy, wouldn't it come and bloom every year? You had to eat the nectarines within a week. I used to eat a whole bushel basket full. So I didn't follow that particular rule at that time. It never caused me any problems. And I don't think fruit's the issue. There was another part of that fruit question. Or diet.
I think you answered all of it. I mean, I guess just worried about fruit and weight loss.
Well, those are the reasons why fruit shouldn't be on your top of your list for losing weight rapidly. Mm-hmm. Remember, spares fat, so it's going to stay in the body fat. And, you can eat a lot of it. Calories count.
Well, and there's no starch, right? So it's really not going to fill you up like you need to be filled up.
Not for a long time. Not the kind of satisfaction that you need and are looking for. If you eat a high fruit diet, And there have been very few fruitarians. Steve Jobs was a fruitarian for a short time in his life. But because of the kind of practice I've had, I've collected a lot of people on the fringe of science and nutrition. They've come to see me, they've contacted me, and I've run into a lot of fruitarians over my half a century of doing this. And I was never impressed. I never found people who had a successful diet in terms of their life and their performance and their enjoyment, et cetera. Starch is crucial. People are starchivores. They're starchitarians. They're starch eaters. Until you get that concept, you're going to be enslaved by misinformation, and you'll be making the wrong choices. But if you just take it and do something as simple as say, I'm going to let my mind become fixed on the fact that potatoes are the best food possible, or starch is what I'm supposed to eat. If you allow yourself just a moment of new thinking, a moment where you decide to yourself, I want to have a better life. Give me one concept that'll give me a better life. Well, if I could give you the concept that you're a starch eater, that would do it. Just one idea that would change your whole life.
Thank you. Let's see, next question. Dr. Dean Scherzai says white potatoes are not helpful for brain health. Please comment.
Oh, I have no comment on that. I don't even know who he is, much less his theory on why white potatoes are bad for health. We're going to be talking about white foods in this afternoon. That's one of my discussions about how people think white food is bad for you. And of course, they're thinking about white bread and white sugar. But this is, again, an incorrect concept, and I'm going to go over that with you this afternoon. The idea that you shouldn't choose, don't choose white. Anyway, I think many of you know what I'm talking about. It's not true. And we'll discuss that this afternoon. More power to this new doctor.
Thank you.
Heather, one of the things that I think you have commented on, and I know your brother, who's a medical doctor, has commented on, is how I have kept the same beliefs for the last half a century, or 44 years anyways. And, like Craig's response was to me one time when he read the Mcdougall plan, then he read the Starch solution. He said, Dad, you said the same thing. I mean, you said it better in the Starch solution, but you said the same thing. And other people will come back to me and say, you're not a very progressive doctor. You're not open-minded enough. Because I have not seen you change in 44 years. Well, there are a lot of doctors out there that are trying to find something new, something unique. God talked to them in their left ear, right ear. I am so special that I figured out that white potatoes are bad for the brain. Excuse me. The reason I haven't changed in 44 years is the truth doesn't change. I had the fortune to figure out things at a very basic level. And I want to tell you, one of the things that I've missed over the years is contesting. Sincere contesting, not stuff that goes on behind my back, but sincere contesting. Show me where I'm wrong. Show me how I got it wrong 44 years ago. I don't think so. And you won't see me changing over the next 20 years either. So get used to it. If you're looking for a new gimmick from Dr. Mcdougall, go someplace else. He's a potato guy.
You're very consistent. Let's see, next question. I love potatoes and eat them regularly, but if I eat them daily, my intestinal transit suffers. Is there any toxin in the potato that can affect the digestive system if eaten in higher quantities?
Not that I'm aware of. This is new to me. So I can't not think of a mechanism. Not that it's not true. Not that you don't have a reaction that may be specific to you or common to other people. I'm just not aware of it. So
we meet people that don't tolerate potatoes well. So we just say, eat a different starch or eat fewer potatoes. Or
one thing nice about potatoes is they have no gluten. So you gluten warriors out there don't have to worry about gluten. And potatoes are very high fiber, which will give me a way to introduce the concept of fiber to people for just a minute. Fiber is non-digestible microscopic chains of sugar. Microscopic chains of sugar. Fiber is not like the bristles of a broom. Some people think because they eat a high fiber diet that they scratch their intestines on the way through because of these bristles of the broom. This is microscopic. You couldn't even see it under a microscope unless you had an electron microscope. You know, they're very tiny. I think the best way of thinking of this is take a baked potato, cook it, and add it to a quart of water and mix it up. It disappears. You know, these are not going to scratch your intestines. They're not going to be rough on your intestines. And I don't know whether this particular question comes from that point of view that, you know, maybe there's something in potatoes that scratch or irritate my intestines. Certainly it's not the fiber. Fiber is microscopic chains of sugar. Happens to be the same as starch. It's glucoses connected together in chains, but in this circumstance, the connections of the glucoses are not digestible by the enzymes present in the human being. Bacteria can digest those enzymes or those connections, those linkages. And they do when you eat food. The remnants of the food go into your large intestine where the bacteria will break down these fibers and give you lots of gas and also give you more energy. I mean, the sugars that are broken down by the bacteria in your intestine, your large intestine, are important for you. They add to your general nutrition. But that's the only difference. It's just glucose, sugars, basic sugars. In this case, they're attached together by linkages that are not digestible, whereas in starch, which is what we eat in terms of potatoes, et cetera, which we digest, which you get energy from, the linkages are digestible. We have enzymes to digest those linkages.
Thank you. Next question. Some doctors say to avoid consuming too many potatoes because of lectins. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, I did this whole thing on lectins. It's in one of my newsletters. It's again a silly concept. Lectins are found in plants. They are components of plants that are made as pesticides for the plant to protect itself. And I don't know. It's a doctor out there that's trying to make a name for himself by somehow identifying the secret to why you're so fat and why you have such bad health is this mystery that I have discovered. So buy my book. You know, just eat the potato. Eat the potato. You don't have to buy the book. Just eat the potato.
So I was typing with someone in the chat, and she has a friend whose doctors are telling her not to eat potatoes because they'll make her gain weight. And so she's terrified of the potato. It's terrible.
That just goes back to the fact that doctors know nothing about human nutrition. You know, Nathan Pritikin used to tell a joke that a doctor and his secretary knew the same about nutrition unless his secretary happened to be on a diet. Then she knew or he knew more about nutrition. We know nothing about nutrition. The average course in medical school for nutrition is no more than 3 hours. And in that 3 hours of, quote, nutrition, and by the way, when I was in medical school, our nutrition course was dedicated on how to choose between different infant formulas. That was our nutrition course in 4 years. It's focused on biochemical formulas and reactions that take place. That has nothing to do with diet therapy. Doctors to this day are not taught about diet therapy. You know, they go through a few chemical reactions and so on, but nothing practical where they can help their patients. I was very instrumental in getting a law passed in the state of California called SB 380, which was signed into law in September of 2011 by Jerry Brown. And it was supposed to, my colleagues watered it down, but it was supposed to require the 11 medical schools in California to teach a course, a meaningful course on nutrition. And it would require the 500 hospitals in California during some of their educational conferences, their noontime conferences, their morning conferences, to include nutrition. I didn't ask them to teach the McDougall diet or the Atkins diet. Just teach medical people about what a human being eats. It makes no sense that we as professionals trained to take care of the human being knows nothing about what a human being eats. Don't ask your doctor about nutrition. It's the only reason I have the knowledge I have is because I developed a passion. I developed a passion for this particular subject in my early years, and it's been a passion that's kept with me the last 45 years. I'm self-educated, but maybe that's the best kind of education there is.
I can attest to that, Dad. I mean, all you would do when I was little was read those medical journals. And I mean, you were always educating yourself. And how many doctors have the time to do that, So
yeah, you got to make sure that your golf game is kept up and your stock market is doing well. I'm sorry, folks. This is a business, and if you treat your doctor other than as a business relationship, you're getting hurt. You're dealing with somebody who's selling you a product, who has other motivations besides your welfare in mind, like paying the office rent, making sure the kids get into the best schools, even if you have to put a little payola in. I was watching an interesting documentary a couple of nights ago on some of these scams to get kids into the best colleges. Well, I didn't do that.
You're just generalizing, though, Dad. I mean, there are some great doctors out there.
Absolutely. There are some great doctors out there that are very conscious, and you're right, Heather. Thank you for pointing that out. Just like I point out that most of the medical therapies out there do more harm than good, but there's some wonderful medical therapies. Like, I broke my leg about 5 years ago. I certainly would have been in big trouble if I didn't have the advantage of the hospital, the surgeons, the metal rod, et cetera. I mean, let's face it, there's some wonderful things about medicine, some wonderful things doctors do. So I appreciate that, and thank you for bringing that into perspective. But by and large, you're getting a bad deal. I'm telling you, stay away from these people unless you have to use them. Stay away from doctors. Sick people see doctors.
And do your own research. Become an informed patient. We've got the internet nowadays, so there's a lot of research we can do on our own. Let's see, can we talk a bit about potatoes and bowel flora?
Oh, this is a whole new subject. There's a lot of, I wish I could remember the name. AJ knows the person's name because he had him on as a guest just, I think it was last week. But there's a gastroenterologist who's brought to the forefront the importance of the bowel bacteria in its response to food. And by the way, this doctor is a vegan. This doctor eats a low-fat vegan. He eats the McDougall diet, whether he knows it or not. But he certainly declared the fact that he was a vegan on this particular radio interview or this particular Zoom interview with Chef AJ. So there's become a lot of focus on the bowel bacteria. Now, I started studying this back in the 1980s when I worked for the American Health Foundation, Ernst Winder's group. And they were studying bowel bacteria in its relationship to causing cancer-forming substances to form as a result of the kind of bacteria that grew in the intestinal tract. So they were doing a lot of work on that. Actually, we sent stool specimens from our clinic to Winder's group to analyze for a potential scientific paper. It never worked out. But back in the 1980s, doctors knew, and I knew, that the food you ate, more specifically, if you ate animal foods, you developed bad, damaging, harmful bowel bacteria. They were the gram-positive type bacteria. And if you ate starches, sugars, then you grew bacteria that love sugar, which are coliforms. So this is not a new subject. It's just a subject that's gotten attention that it deserves. Unfortunately, the way this may end up is that this results in a whole bunch of commercial products. I expect that sometime soon, right now, you're sold probiotics in your grocery store, your pharmacy, your natural food store. These are bacteria that you buy generally in a refrigerated section, which you're supposed to eat and replenish the bacteria in your bowel. Well, by and large, they don't work. By and large, the bacteria either don't grow there, or they're temporary, or they do little. So that's not a good way to change the bowel bacteria. The way you change the bowel bacteria is you put in what we call prebiotics. In other words, the sugars, the right sugars. They'll sell you the sugars in the store, by the way. You can buy them in little bottles, but the right sugars are in starches. And these right sugars will cause the right bacteria to grow. What I'm getting to is that it's known, and this is a lot of the research that I was able to do, and a lot of my friends and colleagues were doing on the people in Africa back in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. It was noted that the people in rural Africa didn't have heart disease or breast cancer or colon cancer or multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis. Plain and simple didn't have it. And of course, they lived on starch-based diets. And of course, they had a bacteria type that was appropriate for a starch-based diet. They grew certain kinds of bacteria. Well, what I see happening is commercial enterprises, what we're going to be doing or are doing right now in the laboratory, is they're collecting stool specimens from rural Africans. And so pretty soon you're going to have bottles of capsuled rural African poop that you can buy. Again, it's this correlation, this association between these bacteria and the fact that these folks don't have any health, but they're missing the intermediary, the common denominator. You're missing the fact that it's a food that gives them the good health and also causes them to grow the good bacteria. Yeah, the good bacteria may have some positive, I'm sure they have some positive effects. I know they do. But the basic issue, which you could deal with right now, is the food. And once you feed the food, then the right bacteria grow. Once you feed the food, then your diabetes goes away. Once you feed the food, your rheumatoid arthritis stops. It's the food, which is free, pretty much, or you got to eat it anyway. So in a sense, it cuts your food bill 80% when you discover this kind of food. Our meal plan, you live on rice or potatoes, which we're going to talk about a little bit next time. You cut your food bill by 60, 70, 80%. You're talking about some tough times getting through these economic situations. Not only are you cutting down on your food bill, but your drug bill, you're not taking all the expensive drugs, the risk of hospitalization, which is very expensive, inefficiency at work, which could be a detriment to your employment. There's a lot of money-saving reasons to do the right thing.
You feel good too. So as AJ typed in, it's Dr.
You look good, Heather, too.
That's right.
That's right. You in your 40s, not bad. In fact,
Late 40s.
Late 40s. Oh my God.
Late 40s.
Yeah, when I was in your age, I never thought that anybody could live to be as old as I am and feel as good and look as good as I do. I know. I got gray hair and it's getting thin. But by and large, ladies and gentlemen, things are going better for me in my mid-70s than I ever imagined. So there is life after 50.
Good to know.
All right.
Let's see, AJ typed in the doctors, Dr. Will B. Olsowitz. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but the flora, the microbiome doc.
Oh, good. Yeah, I was very impressed by this doctor. But again, it was nothing new. The truth doesn't change. It's important for people to describe the truth from different points of view to capture different audiences. And the microbiome seems to be a way of capturing people because it tells the truth, but from a different point of view. And but it doesn't really get you to the bottom line, which is how do I fix it? How do I get my health back? How do I get my life back? It's the food, ladies and gentlemen. It's the food. And today we're focusing on the potato, which is my favorite starch.
Well, I think that's a good thing to end on. It's 11 o'clock. Did you have any comments to wrap it up?
I had a lot of fun this morning explaining to you about the importance of potatoes in terms of human health. And you clearly know that it is ideal food. You can live on potatoes alone. So I hope I've elevated the potato to a platform it deserves to be on. This afternoon, I'm going to talk to you about all kinds of different concerns about potatoes, peculiarities about potatoes. And I'm going to talk to you about potatoes' position in the future. Potato is really important, and I'll explain to you why we have to think about potatoes, not just in terms of our personal health, but in terms of our planetary health. Potatoes where it's at, and scientists know this. Potato above every other starch has a chance of saving the planet for a home for us.